The morning sun peeked through the windows of St. Matthew's Catholic Church in Abuja, casting a golden glow on Ada's white wedding dress. Her heart raced as she walked down the aisle toward Emeka, who stood tall in his black suit, his eyes shining with tears of joy. 5 years ago, they had met at the University of Abuja, where Ada's careful calculations in the accounting department caught the attention of Emeka, the charming chemical engineering student who always had chalk dust on his hands from solving equations on the board. "You may now kiss the bride," the priest announced, and their families erupted in cheers and traditional ululation. Ada's mother threw her wrapper in the air, dancing and praising God, while Emeka's father nodded proudly at his son, who had done everything right, graduated with honors, secured a good job in the oil industry, and married a woman from a respectable family. At the reception, under the beautifully decorated tent, Ada and Emeka danced to both modern songs and traditional Igbo music. The air was filled with the aroma of jollof rice, pounded yam, and egusi soup as guests celebrated what everyone called a perfect match. That evening, in their new home in a quiet Abuja neighborhood, Ada and Emeka sat on their small balcony, still in their wedding clothes. "I can't wait to fill this house with children," Ada whispered, squeezing Emeka's hand. He smiled, pulling her close. "Our children will be as beautiful as their mother and as smart as their father," he teased, making her laugh. They had everything planned out. Ada would continue her job at the bank while Emeka worked as a chemical engineer. In 2 years, they would start their family. The future stretched before them like an endless road of possibilities, and they were ready to walk it together, hand in hand. Little did they know that their journey to parenthood would test their love, faith, and strength in ways they never imagined. But that night, under the star-filled Abuja sky, they were simply two hearts full of love and dreams, believing that everything would unfold exactly as they planned. 2 years after their wedding, the questions started like tiny drops of rain that soon became a flood. "When are we hearing the cry of a baby?" Ada's mother would ask during their Sunday visits. "My friend's children already have 2 babies," Emeka's mother would remind them during phone calls. At first, Ada would smile and say, "God's time is the best," but each question felt like a tiny needle pricking her heart. At work, Ada's once perfect focus began to slip away like sand through her fingers. During an important meeting with bank executives, she completely forgot the numbers she had reviewed just minutes before. Her hands trembled as she flipped through her papers, while her boss, Mr. Okafor, watched with concerned eyes. In the bathroom afterward, she splashed cold water on her face, trying to wash away the shame. A junior colleague found her there, shoulders shaking with silent tears. "It's not just about the meeting," Ada confided. "Every month, when my time comes, I feel like I'm failing everyone." The whispers in their neighborhood grew louder with each passing month. Ada could hear them at the supermarket, at church, even at the salon where she did her hair. Maybe she did something in her youth. "All that banking work has made her too masculine," another suggested. The worst was when Mama Blessing, their neighbor, loudly declared after church one Sunday, "These career women, they wait too long, then cry about having no children." Emeka would hold Ada's hand tightly when they heard such words, but she could see the worry lines deepening on his forehead too. At night, in their bedroom that felt too quiet and too empty, Ada would often find Emeka awake, staring at his phone. "Another article about fertility," he would explain, his voice heavy with concern. They had visited 3 different hospitals, each doctor saying the same thing: "Everything looks normal, just keep trying." but normal started to feel like the cruelest word in the English language. Their home, once filled with laughter and dreams of tiny footsteps, now echoed with unspoken fears and silent prayers. After 3 years of trying, Ada and Emeka decided to seek help beyond modern medicine. It started when Ada's mother called one evening, her voice trembling with excitement. "My daughter, do you remember Mama Ugochi, the herbalist from our village? She has helped many women, even your cousin Chidima, who couldn't conceive for 6 years, now has a beautiful baby girl after visiting her." Ada looked at Emeka, who nodded slowly. They had tried everything the hospital suggested. Perhaps it was time to embrace their roots. The journey to Mama Ugochi's shrine took them through dusty village roads lined with palm trees. The old herbalist's compound smelled of bitter herbs and burning incense. Inside her consultation room, decorated with cowrie shells and ancient calabashes, Mama Ugochi studied them with eyes that seemed to see beyond their physical bodies. "The hospital says nothing is wrong," Ada explained, clutching Emeka's hand. The old woman nodded, her gray hair wrapped neatly in a black scarf. "Sometimes the problem is not what modern eyes can see," she said, her voice gentle but firm. For the next 7 days, they followed Mama Ugochi's instructions carefully. Each morning before sunrise, Ada would drink a bitter herbal mixture that made her stomach turn. Emeka, not wanting his wife to suffer alone, would drink a different concoction made from tree bark and roots. They performed the cleansing rituals as instructed, and Ada wore a tiny red thread around her ankle, which Mama Ugochi had blessed. "This thread connects you to the ancient mothers," she explained. "They will hear your prayers." But even with these traditional interventions, month after month passed without news of a baby. The hardest part came when word reached them that Ada's cousin Chidima had given birth to a healthy baby girl. While Ada was genuinely happy for her cousin, that night she cried in Emeka's arms. "Why not us?" she whispered. Emeka held her close, his own heart heavy with questions. The next morning, as they sat in their living room, their elderly neighbor, Mama Nkechi, came to visit. Looking at their tired faces, she spoke words that would change their lives forever. "My children, sometimes God plants our greatest blessings in the hearts of others. Have you considered adoption?" Mama Nkechi's words about adoption planted a seed in Ada and Emeka's hearts that grew stronger with each passing day. After much prayer and discussion, they decided to visit the Divine Grace Motherless Babies Home. The building was clean but simple, painted in fading blue and white colors. Inside, the sound of babies crying and children playing filled the air with life. Sister Mary, the nun in charge, welcomed them with a warm smile that made Ada's tense shoulders relax a little. "We require several documents," Sister Mary explained, laying out papers on her desk. "Bank statements, proof of employment, character reference letter from your church." As she spoke, Ada felt Emeka's hand squeeze hers gently. Their parish priest, Father Augustine, had known them since their wedding and had watched their struggle for a child. "He will surely write us a beautiful recommendation," Emeka whispered to Ada. That evening, they attended evening mass, and afterward, Father Augustine listened to their story with kind eyes. "God works in mysterious ways," he said, promising to have the letter ready within the week. During their second visit to the home, something magical happened. Among the cribs in the nursery, a 3-month-old baby boy caught Ada's eye. He was smaller than the others, with bright eyes that seemed to look straight into her soul. When Sister Mary placed him in Ada's arms, he didn't cry. Instead, he grabbed her finger with his tiny hand and held on tight. Tears rolled down Ada's cheeks as she looked at Emeka, who was already moving closer, his eyes fixed on the baby's face. His name is Ikenna, Sister Mary said softly, watching the connection unfold before her. He was brought to us 2 months ago. The home study process that followed was intense. Social workers visited their house, checking every room, asking countless questions. Ada and Emeka painted the nursery a soft yellow, filled it with toys and books, and bought a beautiful wooden crib. Their neighbors watched curiously as baby items started arriving at their home. Some, like Mama Nkechi, brought gifts and offered prayers. Others whispered behind closed doors about how real parents have their own children. But Ada and Emeka didn't care anymore. Their hearts were already full of love for the little boy who would soon be their son. What they didn't know was that every day, from her window next door, Mrs. Okonkwo, a secondary school teacher, watched the preparations with a hidden ache in her heart. Her daughter's secret rested heavily in her soul as she silently observed the couple who would raise her grandson. But for now, that truth remained buried, waiting for the right time to be revealed. The day they brought Ikenna home was both joyful and overwhelming. Ada couldn't stop staring at the baby sleeping peacefully in his car seat, hardly believing he was really theirs. The tiny bracelet from the orphanage was still around his wrist, reading Ikenna, Divine Grace Home. As they pulled into their compound, neighbors gathered to welcome them, some bringing small gifts, others just curious to see the adopted baby. Mama Nkechi was the first at their door, carrying a pot of fresh oha soup. Every new mother needs strength, she said, patting Ada's shoulder. Those first few weeks tested everything Ada thought she knew about herself. The bank had given her 3 months of adoption leave, but she wondered if even 3 years would be enough to learn everything. Ikenna had colic and would cry for hours in the night. Ada would pace the living room, singing every lullaby she knew, while Emeka searched the internet for solutions. Sometimes, when nothing seemed to work, she would find herself crying too, wondering if she was failing as a mother. But then, Ikenna would look at her with those bright eyes, grab her finger with his tiny hand, and all her doubts would melt away. Mrs. Okonkwo, their neighbor, surprised them with her subtle kindness. Though they weren't close, she would sometimes stop by with practical advice about baby care. Try rubbing his belly clockwise when he has gas, she suggested one evening, watching Ada struggle with a fussy Ikenna. Her eyes held a strange sadness when she looked at the baby, but Ada was too exhausted to notice. Mr. Okonkwo would wave from his car each morning as he left for his auto parts shop in the business district, his face wearing a gentle smile whenever he saw them. Not everyone was as kind. At their local supermarket, Ada overheard two women whispering, "That bank woman who couldn't have her own baby, she took someone else's." At church, some women would pull their children closer when Ada walked by with Ikenna, as if adoption was something contagious. The deepest cut came during a family gathering when Ada's aunt loudly declared, "In our family, we give birth to our own children." Emeka found Ada in their bedroom that night, clutching Ikenna's blanket and sobbing silently. He held her close and whispered, "Our son chose us, and that makes our love even more special." As months passed, Ikenna grew from a tiny, colicky baby into a chubby, smiling infant who filled their home with laughter. His first word was, "Mama," said one morning as Ada was feeding him breakfast. She called Emeka at work, crying happy tears this time. That evening, they took a family photo, the first of many, with Ikenna sitting on their laps, his smile brightening the whole frame. Looking at the picture later, Ada realized something profound. Love doesn't need blood ties to be real. It grows in the sleepless nights, the worried moments, the small victories, and the countless times you choose each other, day after day. The next day, while at work, Ada found out she had just made a serious error in a major client's transaction, thankfully caught by her junior colleague before it went through. Sitting in her office, she felt the weight of everything crushing her: motherhood, work, and the constant doctor's appointments as she and Emeka kept trying for a baby. The adoption leave had ended 3 months ago, and returning to work was harder than she'd imagined. A soft knock on her door made her quickly wipe her eyes. Mrs. Peterside, a respected church member and longtime customer of the bank, stood in the doorway. Her kind eyes took in Ada's tear-stained face. "My dear, what's troubling you?" she asked, closing the door gently behind her. Ada tried to maintain her professional composure, but the older woman's motherly presence broke through her defenses. Through quiet sobs, Ada confessed her struggles: the pressure to perform at work, the joy but exhaustion of caring for Ikenna, and the continued longing for a biological child. Mrs. Peterside listened with understanding, then reached across the desk to hold Ada's hand. "God is not finished with your story yet, my dear," she said softly. "My husband and I will keep you and Emeka in our prayers. Your faithfulness will not go unrewarded." That wasn't the only challenging day. During an important board meeting, Ada completely lost her train of thought mid-presentation. The board members exchanged concerned glances as she fumbled with her papers, her hands trembling. Mr. Okafor, her boss, had to step in and finish the presentation. Later, in his office, his face was stern, but his voice gentle. "Ada, you've been one of our best performers for years, but lately, is everything okay?" She could only nod, afraid that speaking would release the tears she was holding back. At home, Emeka noticed how Ada would sometimes stare at her laptop, lost in thought, while Ikenna played nearby. "Maybe you should take a break from work," he suggested one evening, but Ada shook her head firmly. "The bank's medical insurance covers fertility treatments," she reminded him. "We need that." Plus, despite her struggles, work had always been part of who she was. She wouldn't let go of that part of herself. Things came to a head when Ada nearly transferred 50 million to the wrong account. Her hands shook as she stared at the computer screen, realizing what she'd almost done. This time, Mr. Okafor called her in for a serious conversation. "Take 2 weeks," he said firmly but kindly. "Sort out whatever you need to sort out. Your position will be waiting." Looking at his understanding face, Ada finally broke down and shared everything: the fertility treatments, the adoption adjustments, the sleepless nights. To her surprise, he listened without judgment. "My wife and I waited 8 years for our first child," he revealed. "Sometimes the hardest journeys lead to the most beautiful destinations." Those 2 weeks became a turning point. Ada spent mornings with Ikenna, taking him to the park, reading him stories, and simply being present. In the afternoons, while he napped, she worked with a therapist recommended by the bank's HR department. Slowly, she learned to balance her roles as a banker and a mother, to accept that some days wouldn't be perfect, and to find strength in her support system, including unexpected allies like Mrs. Peterside, who would often check on her at church with a gentle squeeze of her hand and a whispered prayer. 4 years had passed since Ikenna came into their lives, filling their home with laughter and endless questions. "Mama, why is the sky blue?" he would ask Ada. "Papa, how do cars work?" he would question Emeka during their evening walks. His curiosity seemed as boundless as his energy, and their love for him grew deeper with each passing day. Even Mama Nkechi would say, "That boy was born from his parents' hearts, not just their bodies." One sunny Saturday morning, as they all sat at morning mass, watching Ikenna serve as one of the youngest altar boys, Ada felt a special kind of pride. She remembered the early days when some people would whisper about adoption, But now those same voices had fallen silent. Ikenna had charmed everyone with his bright smile and kind heart. After church, mother and son had their special ritual of stopping at the bakery for meat pies. "Mama, can I have two today?" Ikenna would always ask, giving her that special smile that melted her heart every time. Life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Ada had found her balance at work, even earning a promotion to senior manager. Emeka's career in the oil industry was flourishing, and he was home more often now that he'd taken a supervisory position. They still visited fertility clinics and took the prescribed medications, but the desperate edge of their longing had softened. Their home was already full of love. Mrs. Okonkwo, their neighbor, remained a quiet presence in their lives. She would often compliment Ikenna's school uniform when she saw him leaving for school, or comment on how tall he was growing. There was always something in her eyes when she looked at him, something Ada couldn't quite name. Mr. Okonkwo, despite his busy schedule at the auto parts shop, would always greet Ikenna with special warmth whenever their paths crossed. Yet, there were still moments of sadness. At family gatherings, some relatives would pointedly discuss bloodlines and inheritance. Ada's heart would clench whenever someone asked, "Don't you want children of your own?" As if Ikenna wasn't truly theirs. During these times, she would hold her son closer, remembering the day she first held him at Divine Grace Home, how perfectly he fit in her arms. One evening, as they watched Ikenna playing in their small garden, Emeka wrapped his arms around Ada's waist. "Do you ever regret it?" he whispered. "Choosing adoption?" Ada turned to face him, her eyes shining with certainty. "Never," she replied. "Ikenna didn't grow under my heart. He grew in it." They stood there, watching their son chase butterflies in the fading sunlight, grateful for the blessing of time that had brought them this joy. The morning sickness caught Ada by surprise. At first, she dismissed it as stress or something she ate, but after 3 days of rushing to the bathroom before her morning meetings, she bought a pregnancy test on her way home from work. In her bathroom, hands shaking, she watched as 2 lines appeared clear as day. Ada slid down to the floor, tears streaming down her face, her heart pounding with hope and fear. 4 years of raising Ikenna, 6 years of marriage, countless doctor visits, and now this small stick held the promise she'd been praying for. She waited until Ikenna was asleep before telling Emeka. When she handed him the test, he stared at it for a long moment, then pulled her into a tight embrace. They cried together, quietly, so as not to wake their son. The next morning, they took Ikenna to his favorite breakfast spot. "How would you like to be a big brother?" Ada asked him. His eyes grew wide with excitement. "Can I teach the baby all my games?" His enthusiasm made their joy complete. News of Ada's pregnancy spread through their community like wildfire. This time, the whispers were different. "See how God works?" some said. The adoption opened the way for blessing. Others suggested it was reward for their kindness in adopting Ikenna. But Ada and Emeka knew better. Every child was a blessing, whether by birth or adoption. Their regular doctor confirmed the pregnancy, and to their amazement, discovered it was twins. Not everyone shared their joy. Madam Blessing, who had always been critical of their adoption, now claimed they must have used jazz, supernatural means, to conceive. Some neighbors who had distanced themselves after the adoption suddenly became overly friendly, bringing gifts and advice. Through it all, Mrs. Okonkwo remained quietly supportive, often sending over nourishing soups when Ada's morning sickness was at its worst. Her eyes held a strange mixture of joy and something deeper when she watched Ikenna gently patting his mama's growing belly. As Ada's belly grew, so did their happiness. Ikenna would talk to the twins every night, telling them stories and promising to be the best big brother. In quiet moments, Ada would catch Emeka watching all of them with tears in his eyes. God's timing is perfect, he would say, holding her close. Their home, already full of love with Ikenna, now buzzed with anticipation for the new arrivals. Ada's baby shower was a celebration of love and tradition. Women from church, colleagues from the bank, and neighbors filled their compound with songs and laughter. Ikenna darted between guests, proudly wearing his Big Brother t-shirt. The living room overflowed with gifts, tiny clothes, baby supplies, and traditional wraps. Mama and Kechi had insisted on following all the proper Igbo customs for twins, including special prayers and blessings. During a quiet moment, when most guests were busy with refreshments, Mrs. Okonkwo discreetly approached Ada. "My dear, could you and Emeka spare a moment? My husband and I need to speak with you privately." Something in her voice made Ada's heart skip a beat. In Ada's study, away from the festivities, Mr. and Mrs. Okonkwo sat across from Ada and Emeka, their faces heavy with emotion. Mrs. Okonkwo's hands trembled as she handed Ada a small, wrapped package. Inside was a gold pendant, identical to the one they had found among Ikenna's belongings at the orphanage. Through tears, Mrs. Okonkwo revealed that Ikenna was their grandson. Their only daughter, Kioma, had become pregnant in her final year of secondary school. Fearing the stigma would destroy her dreams of medical school, they had made the painful decision to give the baby up for adoption. The truth needed to stay between their families to protect Kioma's future. Kioma is now a doctor, married to a wonderful man, Mr. Okonkwo explained, his voice rough with emotion. She's coming home next week. We've watched Ikenna grow these past 4 years, seen how much you and Emeka love him. God's hand was truly in this. Of all the families who could have adopted him, he came to our neighbors. Ada and Emeka sat stunned, pieces of puzzles falling into place. Mrs. Okonkwo's special attention, their quiet support, the sadness in their eyes when they watched Ikenna play. After a long moment, Ada reached out and took Mrs. Okonkwo's hands in hers. "Thank you for trusting us with this truth," she said softly, "and thank you for trusting us with your grandson." They agreed that Kioma should meet Ada and Emeka before any decisions were made about telling Ikenna. The celebration continued outside, but in that study, a new family bond had formed, one woven from sacrifice, love, and divine providence. As Ada felt her twins kick inside her, she marveled at how God had not only blessed them with 3 children, but had also given them an extended family in the most unexpected way. The week after the baby shower crawled by slowly. Ada and Emeka spent long nights discussing how to navigate this new reality. They weren't just adoptive parents anymore. They were part of an intricate web of love and sacrifice that spanned 2 families. Each morning, seeing Mrs. Okonkwo in her front yard felt different now. Their greetings carried the weight of their shared secret. When Kioma arrived, the meeting was arranged in Ada and Emeka's living room after Ikenna had gone to bed. She was everything they'd imagined, poised, beautiful, and carrying herself with the quiet confidence of a medical professional. But when she saw Ikenna's photos on the walls, her composure cracked. "He has my father's smile," she whispered, touching a picture of Ikenna on his 4th birthday. Kioma shared her story, the fear and shame she'd felt at 16, the agony of giving up her baby, and the determination to make that sacrifice count. "Every achievement, every exam I passed was for him," she said. "I wanted to become someone he could be proud of." Now married to a fellow doctor and building her own practice, she had found happiness, but never forgotten the child she'd given up. Ada held Kioma's hand as they looked through Ikenna's photo albums together. "He loves science," Ada told her, always asking how things work. Kioma's eyes lit up. She'd been the same way as a child. They talked for hours, sharing stories, tears, and cautious hopes for the future. They agreed that Ikenna was too young to understand the complexity of his story. For now, the knowledge would stay between them, with Kioma visiting whenever her busy schedule as a doctor allowed, always calling ahead to ensure Ada and Emeka would be home. As the night drew to a close, Kioma hugged Ada tightly. "Thank you for giving him everything I couldn't," she whispered, "and thank you for letting me be part of his life now." Looking at her daughter across the room, Mrs. Okonkwo's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. Their secret had become a bridge, not a wall, connecting two families in an unbreakable bond of love. Later that night, as Emeka checked on sleeping Ikenna, Ada felt her twins kick. She placed her hand on her belly, thinking about the mysterious ways God writes our stories. In their home, love had never followed a straight line. It had curved and twisted, hidden and revealed itself, but always grown stronger with each test it faced. 3 months after the twins' arrival, the church was filled with the sound of joyful singing. Ada and Emeka had decided to have all three children baptized together: Ikenna, who had never been baptized at the orphanage, and the newborn twins, Chimamanda and Olana. The morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the white christening gowns. Ikenna stood proudly between his parents, holding his baby sister's certificates, while his own sat carefully folded in Ada's purse. Mr. and Mrs. Okonkwo sat in the front pew, their eyes glistening with tears as they watched their grandson stand before the altar with his adoptive parents and baby sisters. Kioma had wanted to attend, but couldn't. Her hospital duty couldn't be rescheduled. Still, her parents would take videos and pictures to share with her later. The priest's words echoed through the church. Family is not always blood. It is the people in your life who want you in theirs, the ones who accept you for who you are, the ones who would do anything to see you smile. Ada squeezed Emeka's hand, thinking how true those words were. The congregation watched as holy water was sprinkled on each child's head, Ikenna giggling when a drop rolled down his nose. After the ceremony, their compound was transformed for the celebration. Food tables groaned under the weight of traditional dishes: jollof rice, pounded yam, egusi soup, and various grilled meats. Children ran around playing games while adults gathered in groups, sharing stories and laughter. Through it all, Ada noticed the quiet dignity with which Mr. and Mrs. Okonkwo carried themselves, the way they watched Ikenna from afar, their love hidden but ever present. Mama Nkechi, who had been chosen as the twins' godmother, moved through the party with the authority of her position, making sure every custom was observed properly. She didn't know the full story, but she had noticed the special attention the Okonkwos paid to the family and attributed it to good neighborliness. "See how God works?" she said to Ada. "First he sent you Ikenna to prepare your heart, then he blessed you with twins. Your home is now full of children's laughter." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the compound, Ada watched Ikenna carefully holding one of his baby sisters while Emeka held the other. The sight brought tears to her eyes, tears of joy, of gratitude, of wonder at how life had brought them all together. Mrs. Okonkwo caught her eye across the compound and gave her a small, knowing smile. Their shared secret had become a blessing, a bond that made their unusual family even more precious. That evening, after the guests had gone and the children were asleep, Ada and Emeka sat on their balcony just as they had done on their wedding night. The sounds of their children's steady breathing came through the baby monitor. "Did you ever imagine our family would look like this?" Emeka asked softly. Ada leaned against him, thinking of all the tears and prayers that had led to this moment. No, she replied. God's plan was so much more beautiful than anything we could have imagined. 5 years had passed since the baptism, and life had woven its patterns into a beautiful tapestry of love and understanding. Ikenna, now 9 years old, had grown into a thoughtful boy who doted on his 5-year-old twin sisters. The bond between them was unshakable, even when the twins, Chimamanda and Olana, would sometimes team up to borrow his favorite books. Ada's career at the bank had flourished. She was now a regional director, using her position to advocate for family-friendly workplace policies. Emeka had risen to become a senior engineer, and between them, they had built a home where love flowed as freely as laughter. Mrs. Okonkwo had retired from teaching, but still helped the children with their homework, her love for education finding new purpose in tutoring her grandchild and the twins, though Ikenna still didn't know the full extent of their connection, but will be told when he gets older. Kioma's visits, though not frequent due to her demanding career as a doctor, were precious moments filled with quiet joy. She had found her own happiness, building a successful medical practice with her husband and eventually having 2 children of her own. Each time she visited, under the guise of being a family friend, she would bring medical books for Ikenna, nurturing his growing interest in science. One evening, as the family sat in their garden watching the stars come out, Ikenna asked a question that made everyone pause. "Mama, why did you choose me?" Ada pulled him close, looking at the same stars that had witnessed their journey. "My son," she said softly, "we didn't choose you. God chose us for each other. Some families are born from the heart instead of the body, and that makes them just as special." The years had taught them all precious lessons, that family isn't always about blood, but about the love that binds hearts together, that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as challenges, and that God's plans, though mysterious, are always more beautiful than our own. They had learned that sacrifice, when done with love, bears fruit in unexpected ways, and that secrets kept to protect others can become bridges that unite families. Most importantly, they discovered that every child is a gift, whether they come through birth, adoption, or the mysterious workings of destiny. The prejudices that had once wounded them now seemed small in the face of their family's joy. Those who had whispered about adoption fell silent when they saw the unshakable bonds of love that held their family together. As the stars twinkled above them, Ada thought about all the women who might be walking the same path she once traveled, hearts aching for a child, facing judgment from society, or carrying secrets too heavy to bear. She wished she could tell them that hope never dies, it just takes unexpected forms, that sometimes the longest prayers are answered in the most surprising ways, and that every heart has enough room to love beyond the boundaries of blood. The story of their family became a testament to faith, patience, and unconditional love. It taught their community that family is not about who you were born to, but who God brings together, that love multiplies when shared, and that the stars align perfectly in God's own time. In their home, 3 children slept peacefully under one roof, while 2 sets of parents, one by law and love, the other by blood, shared the blessing of watching them grow. Their story wasn't just about adoption or fertility, it was about how love, in all its forms, builds bridges across the deepest rivers of life. As night fell over Abuja, their story continued to unfold beneath the same stars that had witnessed their journey, a reminder that every family story is unique, every love is valid, and every child is a blessing, no matter how they come into our lives.